Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Nasiri, and each week I meet with military veterans to learn about their civilian career, what they do, how they got there, and advice for other veterans seeking to do the same. Today's episode number 237 with Matthew Griffin.
In that state of anger, I looked down on a table and there was a combat boot sole with a flip-flop thong punch in it. And I just thought it was ugly and cool. And then in combat and flip-flops stuck together. And then I quickly went back to my hotel room and I sat on it for a little bit. And I checked the domain name and it was open. And nobody had taken the Facebook page either. Nobody put combat and flip-flops together. So that was it. I just called my Ranger buddy, Donald Lee, and we registered the domain in December 2009, and we really didn't launch until January 2012, just because it took us that long to figure out how to actually form the company, get shoes made, and do everything that we needed to do to really launch the business publicly.
Well, this is one of my favorite interviews to date. Whether you're interested in entrepreneurship or any career path, there is something in this interview for you. In this interview, we talk about how a library card may be more valuable than a college or grad school experience. We talk about the pros and cons of gaining experience prior to starting a company. We talk about the tactics of starting a company and how to do that on a limited budget while supporting a family. We talk about finding co-founders. We talk about how to maintain a fresh mind even amidst the grueling mental battle of running a company. We talk about daily planning and finding your game changers and more. As always, at beyondtheuniform.io, you'll find show notes with links to everything we discuss in this episode, as well as a text transcript thanks to Kathleen Get Dillon. You will also find more information about Beyond the Uniform's coaching program, where you can be connected with subsidized, professional, certified executive coaches to help you figure out your next career move. So with that, let's dive in to my conversation with Griff. Joining me today in Issaquah, Washington, my guest is Matthew Griff, also known as Griff. Griff, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Well, thanks for having me here today. I appreciate it, Justin.
For listeners, I wanted to give an abbreviated background. Griff is the CEO and co-founder of Combat Flip-Flops, which creates peaceful, forward-thinking opportunities for self-determined entrepreneurs affected by conflict. He started out at West Point, after which he served in the 75th Ranger Regiment as a rifle company fire support officer with 3 tours to Afghanistan and 1 tour to Iraq. His post-military career includes work as the Director of Military Sales for Remote Medical International and the Director of Special Operations for Protect the Force. So Griff, I'd love to spend the majority of our time talking about Combat Flip-Flops, but could you take us back to your transition from the Army and what that initial job search was like?
Yeah, I think like most guys, you don't really start planning for your job and your life after the military until you feel you've got all your requirements done to your unit. You're always still there taking care of the guys first. It's first and foremost. And I left the Ranger Regiment early 2006, right after my deployment to Iraq, and I found a desk job at Corps Artillery. And I just really explained to my boss and said, hey, I'm going to work super hard for you here, but I need some time to be able to plan for my transition and take care of my family after service. And the colonel was super cool, and he understood where I was at and what I was doing. I worked really hard for him in the mornings, and in the afternoons, I would go out and I would basically hunt down all the internet, all the job search fairs, all the the junior military officer recruiting fairs and festivals, and just started pinging everything. You missed all the shots you don't take. So my thought was hey, I'm just going to see as many of these things as possible to find out what's out there for me. And I did the standard thing of throwing on the suit that I bought in Iraq, and went to the standard government contracting, government big military contracting recruiting organizations, and went to all their job fairs and stood there with a whole bunch of other lieutenants and captains. And my wife and I were both West Point graduates. She was getting out at the same time I was, and we were living in the Seattle area in 2006, and these guys kept telling us, oh, there's no jobs here in Seattle. There's no jobs here in the Pacific Northwest. You need to move to D.C., to the East Coast. And that just didn't sit right with us. We loved the Northwest. We wanted to stay in Washington. Her family was here, so we wanted to stay. And so all those great opportunities that are there for us, we just passed on because we couldn't stay in Washington. We knew where we wanted to live. But I just kept going to these job fairs, and eventually I ended up in one in a hotel conference room in Factoria by the mall. And it was going through, and I was looking at Honeywell, doing building controls. There was another company that was doing methane gas recycling at a landfill, which I thought was pretty cool. And then the other one, which I hadn't even really considered, was home building. And so this is 2006, right in the boom of, the housing boom. And there was a Marine captain who was a senior manager there. He'd gotten out, and his whole thing was hiring company grade officers and or NCOs to run his job sites. And he was a really cool guy, had a great attitude. The positions were local, and I just stayed in touch with him. And a week later, he called me as I was coming down a mountain skiing, and he says, "Hey man, do you want a job? I got a job for you. It's 10 miles from where you're currently living. Would you be open to working for us?" And sight unseen, without seeing any paperwork, I just agreed and said yes. And that was February, and I was getting out in April. And so I had 2 months where like, oh, this is great. I'm going to ETS. I've got a job. I can step right out into it. And I wanted to take a week off to go fishing with my father-in-law after the military. So I just told him, like, look, I can start for you in April if you'd like me to, but I'd really like to go on this vacation with my dad, and I could start end of April. Is that cool? And he's, yeah, sure, man, that's great. And I think that's the one thing that I recall out of the civilian hiring practice that's different from the military is you can now state your personal goals to an employer or your family time with an employer, and they're understanding of it and actually willing to work with you on it. And so that was my first hiring experience. And I went to work for Centex Homes for 2 years until the housing boom broke in spring of 2008. And then I quickly found myself out of a job and looking for a new job.
Fast forwarding ahead, what was the point at which you knew you wanted to become an entrepreneur and start your own company? And also, could you walk us through the genesis of Combat Flip-Flops, where that came from?
Yeah, not a problem. So it's funny. I have to say my drive to be an entrepreneur probably started in Afghanistan. You hang around all these, tier units, and they have mandatory reading lists. And if, here are these super elite guys and they're being told to read all these books, well, then I guess I should read these books too. And what I found was that the majority of them were business books and leadership books and entrepreneurship books and how you make it through struggle, how you do difficult things with small teams. And that always appealed to me. And I always seemed to gravitate toward those books. And I always thought it'd be a cool thing to run my own company. But I never really felt like I had the skills to do it. I understood it in practice, but I didn't feel like I had the skills or experience to really step out on my own and do it without failing miserably. So I went from Centex Homes, then I went to Remote Medical International. And at Remote Medical International, our job was to provide Western level medical care in difficult or austere environments. And this is right at the height of the contracting boom when Obama got in office. And so all of these contractors, all the Blackwaters and the triple canopies and all those big dogs were deploying all over the world, and they needed medical supplies and equipment and doctors. And we were the company that was pretty much the subject matter experts at doing it. And it was my job to go and to sell these products to all of these companies. And that meant traveling to all of these places. And when I was there, in Afghanistan or in DRC or Kenya or wherever else I went, what I saw was that entrepreneurs were the true local leaders making the positive difference in the communities. And that it felt safer. It felt better. It was a side of the communities that I never saw when I was in uniform. And it inspired me as a person who wanted to do the right thing for our country and end terrorism and terrorist attacks and say, hey, like we should be putting more entrepreneurs in these communities if we really want to make a difference.
I'm thinking, go ahead.
Yeah. So, long story, but in, December 2009, I ended up in a combat boot factory in Kabul, Afghanistan, in hunt of a cup of coffee. And I saw hundreds of people working at a boot factory. And I found out that they were going to close the factory after their contract had ended. And it really made me angry. And in that state of anger, I looked down on a table and there was a combat boot sole with a flip-flop thong punched in it. And I just thought it was ugly and cool. And then in combat and flip-flops stuck together. And then I quickly went back to my hotel room and I sat on it for a little bit. And I checked the domain name and it was open. And nobody had taken the Facebook page either. Nobody put combat and flip-flops together. So that was it. I just called my Ranger buddy, Donald Lee, and we registered the domain in December 2009. And we really didn't launch until January 2012, just because it took us that long to figure out how to actually form the company get shoes made and do everything that we needed to do to really launch the business publicly.
That's awesome. I have a ton of questions there, but first I'm just thinking of so many of our listeners. I know a question that they often have is many of them aspire to entrepreneurship like it sounds like you did when you were in Afghanistan. And a common question that comes up is, do I go straight from the military and start it? Do I go get industry experience? Do I go to grad school, usually get an MBA? And I'm curious your thoughts on what did you gain from the 4-ish years that you had of industry experience that prepared you for entrepreneurship? And, the second part of that is, could you have done this directly out of the military?
I'll start with the college thing first. I'm not a big fan of going to college. I think that you can get the same education out of a library card and on-the-job training. So my thought on it I want to go work for a big business and figure out what big business looks like, understand how their cycles work. And then I went from big business to working for a small business. How does a small business work? What do their cycles look like? And then, I think the main thing that working in industry did for me is it rounded off my rough edges. Coming out of a tough environment at home and athletics into the military to West Point, into special operations into combat, I was a lot more direct of a person than I probably needed to be in the civilian market. And those jobs helped me round off my rough edges before I felt like I could go into any civilian situation and engage positively. And then you should always be asking questions. The military teaches you a great lesson, and every 2 years you're going to move up in responsibility and you're going to move over in job title. So whether you're a platoon leader and then you go to be a logistics officer and then you go to be a recruiter and then you go to be whatever else it is, you could go work at a foreign embassy or you could go work at the Pentagon. There were so many different jobs in the military where they've always forced you to learn something quickly. And then as soon as you got comfortable in that job, they move you up in responsibility again and make you learn something new, which is what business is. And I took that in my civilian role as well. I was a site manager for a construction company. I learned how to manage schedules and budgets and non-compliance and subcontractors. And then I went to work for Remote Medical International, where I learned sales and government contracting. And then I went to work for Protective Force, and I learned consulting and business leadership. And then I went to work for another company called 1020 Services, which was an offshoot of Protective Force, as the vice president of operations. And learn how to actually start and build a business with shareholders and investors, and how to hire a team and how to grow a team and how to make initial sales goals, which is just the cumulative skills that I had learned in all my industry experience. And then it was late. We launched in January 2012, and combat flip-flops was a part-time job for me. And then it wasn't until summer of 2013 where the business had really gained enough notoriety. And people were looking at us from a company, especially people in industry. They saw me working as a vice president of operations for a defense firm, but then they also saw me running this combat flip-flops company. And I think people didn't take it seriously because I wasn't fully committed to it. And so the lesson was, people don't commit to you until you commit to it. And in the summer of 2013, I left my job as the vice president of operations for 1020 Services. And then I fully stepped into the role of CEO of combat flip-flops.
Do you have thoughts around that of, because I like that thought of what you said, that people don't commit to you until you commit to the idea or the company. And then there's also the practical reality of how long it takes often for a company to generate revenue, and then how much longer after that until it can generate revenue to sustain its employees. And I'm just curious if you have any advice for someone thinking of starting their own company about financially how to do that, and if it's right to be able to do that side hustle like you did, or if you regret that, or any thoughts on just kind of making ends meet while bringing a new idea to life?
No, I think if you're going to be in entrepreneurship, you're going to learn the lesson of burning the candle at both ends. Especially if you have a family, if you can't live on rice and beans, if you can't shrink up your living expenses, if you like all that fancy stuff, then you're probably going to have to work a job while your company is it's just not even paying you, it's taking your money. And we invested a lot personally in combat flip-flops, and I would recommend that to everybody. Is when you think about starting a business, you need to have 6 months in savings of complete runway for you. Like, that's just it, sitting liquid in a cash bank account. If you're going to jump into this, you need to be able to have the lack of stress that comes from knowing that you can feed your family and pay your rent for 6 months. You also need to be very careful with your spreadsheets and your initial projections. I don't know how many potential business owners come and they have these ideas from these incubators, and they set all this stuff down, and they outline their budgets and outline their sales numbers, and they have no market experience, no name, no branding, and it shows them being a millionaire in 6 months. Like, it doesn't work like that. It's not how it works. There's the law, and I think it comes out of the computing world or the software world. It's called Drumell's Law. And as a project will take twice as long and cost twice as much as you had initially anticipated after Drumell's Law has been taken into effect. So things take 2 to 3 to 4 times what you think they're going to take throughout the process of starting a business. It just is, and it's more expensive than you ever think it would be.
I think that's so true. I think it's oftentimes when I meet with first-time entrepreneurs, that I just see them spending money frivolously on things where it's like, oh man, you got to have so much dry powder because there's so many unanticipated speed bumps that are going to get in your way. And I always thought of it, I like Drumell's Law more. I always thought of it 10x on the time and 10x on the budget. Like everything, every little tiny detail for me seemed to have taken 10 times more resources and 10 times more time. And so I love that thought that you're saying. It sounds like having 6 months of those savings and being able to support your family is really essential to giving yourself the breathing room to bring this idea to life.
Yeah, you gotta be comfortable, without the fancy stuff. If you're coming from the military, you're used to living out of a backpack in a difficult area that's dusty and dirty. And when you come home and you're starting a business, you might not have the 3,000 square foot house and all the other things that you're used to. You might have to go into a tiny little apartment with you and your family and cinch down the budget and watch how you make all your meals, you pack all your lunches, you don't go out, right? And you try to extend that 6 months as much as possible. So that way you give yourself that breathing room to be successful.
I want to ask more questions about Combat Flip-Flops and kind of how this came to fruition, but maybe just to set the stage for listeners, I gave a really abbreviated description of what you do. If you ran into someone who's maybe still in the Army or Air Force or whatever else, and they asked you what you do, how would you explain what you do for a living and what your company does?
Yeah, we just make cool, fun lifestyle and fashion products in war zones. That helps create businesses there. And then we use our profits to put little girls to school in Afghanistan. And between the two of them, we're providing education and empowerment to those communities so our service members don't have to go there anymore.
I love the whole premise. And I also really love the phrase that I've seen in your personal branding and the company's branding of business, not bullets. Could you share what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's this borders frequented by merchants seldom need soldiers. There's so much more positivity and sustainability that comes from business and a fair value exchange of ideas and services and technology than there is from a bullet or a bomb. That's very one way. And we as a nation, we've got the biggest bombs and the biggest bullets, and so we're essentially the bully, and nobody likes a bully. And I know it's tough to hear for people to say that, but if we really want to create positive, sustainable change in these areas, we might have to change how we're doing or how we're thinking about it. And we've been at this for 17 years now, almost 18, and we're nowhere closer to the finish line than when we started. And I think that as a nation, we need to stop and peel ourselves back and take an honest look at what we're doing and say, hey, how we're working isn't working. We might need to change our course of action here. And if we empowered not just the 1% of the U.S. population, just the service members to make this change, if we empowered the American population, all 100% of it, and the whole might behind our economy, we can make a significant impact in these areas, and we can do it without ever firing a bullet, and we can look good to the international community, which helps America in the long run.
I love that. And for listeners, if this is energizing you and exciting you, I'd encourage you to check out episode 216 I had with Kimberly Young of Roomy Spice, who shares a similar for-profit, for-good mission that Combat Flip-Flops does, and also similarly, as we'll get into in a second, was on Shark Tank and had that experience. Griff, could you talk about? Yeah,
Kim's a badass. I'm in complete admiration of her. I have a full-on human crush on that woman. She's amazing. I remember when she first started her business, she called me and we talked about it, and all the way through getting up on a Shark Tank, because we were on Shark Tank before her, and just watching her grow And she's the single largest employer of Afghan women in Afghanistan.
That's unreal.
And she did that in a few years.
I had no idea.
It's amazing.
That's wild. Yeah, she is a very special human being. Could you talk about? So I believe that you started the company with a friend that you served with in the Ranger Regiment, and I'd love for you to share more about how you found your co-founders, and especially any advice you would give to listeners about finding co-founders and vetting them, especially because, a lot of conventional wisdom, some people would say, advise against starting a company with friends and family. And it seems like in your experience, it's really paid off positively. And so could you share a little bit more about that story and any advice on that subject?
Yeah, so Donald Lee was one of my privates. He was a PFC. So he was 25 years old when September 11th happened, got motivated, joined the Army to be a Ranger fire supporter. So he was 25 when he showed up as the lowest ranking dude on the team. And he only had a 3-year contract. So they were never going to put him in a leadership position. They were never going to send him to Ranger school. He was there to carry weight and do his job. And that provided him a little bit of flexibility, which it didn't to other privates, because he would actually speak up and speak his mind because he had more experience. He was actually older than me as a private, now as a lieutenant. And so I would say something in a mission brief, and he's like, "Nah, that's stupid." And like everybody would turn around and look at him, like the NCO's like, "I'm going to smoke him after this." And then he'd say, "No, we should do it this way." And it was always smarter, faster, more efficient, and it would change the plan. And so having somebody who could speak their mind, in a position like against a position of authority, but do it in a way that was in the best interest of the team. And he's always been that way. He'd come out of a rough Hispanic neighborhood in Los Angeles, and we'd call him our perpetual naysayer. Like when something's questionable in the business, we pass it off to him and say, "Hey, Lee, give it the sniff test. Let us know if this is good or bad." And he does. He takes that role very seriously. Our other co-founder is Andy Surit. He's my brother-in-law. I call him my brother, but our wives are sisters. Our customer service manager and our video guy. Video guy's been working for us since he was 17, and now he's 23, 24. His mom runs our customer service department, and we all live within 4 or 5 blocks of one another, except for Lee. He lives in LA. And the thing I would just say about co-founders is you have to have a diverse background. Find somebody that is completely different than you. What they focus on, what their attention is, like what their priorities are on. Like find somebody that's different than you. Lee is very good at analyzing data, cutting things up, and like whittling out the bad stuff with authority. Andy, Andy is a production guru. Like he loves details. When we had a failed first run, we actually had to manufacture our first one ourselves. As the container of materials bobbed across the Pacific Ocean toward Washington, like he figured out adhesives down to the molecular level to figure out what was the best process in order to bond our EVA to our rubber for our footwear. Jill is super compassionate, and she, always wants to do right by everybody. The top person you would ever want in a customer service position. Zach is a creative, and then me, like I'm a big idea guy. I like coming up with ideas, and then I like planning. If you find me in the details, like something's really wrong. But it's just like I'm able to like, all right, hey, here's the plan, here's the idea. Is it feasible? Yes, no. Go down the flow chart. Okay, let's start executing, and like giving people the tools that they need in order to be able to succeed. And so you're circling all the way back around to your question is find people that are different than you, but just as motivated, and they're aligned values wise and for the mission of whatever you're doing.
From that time when you look down on the table and you see this flip-flop and you bring it back and you're thinking about this and buying the domain name, from that point, how long did it take you to sell your first shoe, and then how long did it take until you had enough money to actually pay yourself to be able to take that leap to do this full time? From
idea to sale of first product, not manufacture, sale of first product, was 26 months. As far as paying ourselves, from four years to take a paycheck.
I just want to let that sink in for listeners, because I know myself, and I know a lot of people were always in a rush do things, and we, again, you think things are really simple and straightforward, and I'm going to get out, I'm going to start this company, this is going to be what I'm going to do, and that does work out sometimes, but I think that Griff's story is more representative than not. 26 months to first product and 4 years to be able to pay themselves, and just to make sure you have that financial game plan in place. Maybe it's a spouse's income, maybe it's some sort of side income, maybe it's the reserves, maybe, however you make those ends meet. It might take longer than you expect to be able to pull money out of the business without it being detrimental to the company. Griff, what were, just to paint the picture for listeners, what were those first years like for you? What was your life like? What was the sorts of activities you were doing? What kept you up at night? What was the nitty gritty of that period?
Are you talking before launch, between idea to launch?
Exactly.
You're talking after launch in the
Yep.
first couple? Yeah. No, I was still working for Protect the Force, and then over to 1020 Services. So I would, I'm an early morning person. I wake up, 4 or 5 in the morning. I do my morning routines, get my workout in, and then I like to make breakfast for my girls, get them off to school. And then it was a home-based business, and so I would just literally float over to the office, and I'd work from 8 a.m. to noon, walk back to the house, have lunch, work from 12:30 to 6:30, come back home, make dinner, repeat for years. and that's what it takes. Like, it's just it. Like, you got to be super disciplined. There's a lot of nights and weekends in there. If something's got to get done, in a corporate mindset, or specifically when you're an employer or a boss, like, if people run into a problem, I don't know how to do this. Oh, it's quitting time. I got to go. I'll get to it tomorrow. It's not like that in your own business. Like, your problems are your problems, and nobody cares about them like you do. And so if you got a problem that you don't know how to solve, and there's nobody else in your organization that can solve it, like, get the problem solving. And it's kind of one of our lessons or our mantras that we teach, or we work with young entrepreneurs on, is like, you are now a professional problem solver. That is your job. Like, it's cool that you're a good technician and you have this product, this ideas, but now you've got to go from technician to leader and problem solver.
I love that emphasis on just extreme ownership of, no one else is going to solve this. No one else is going to fix it or figure it out. You are the one responsible. Can you talk about the flip side of that? Like, how do you, you are in a very unique spot as CEO and as a founder or co-founder. All of this pressure is on you. And how do you have any advice for coping with that pressure and coping with that responsibility for, coming on a decade? How do you keep up that stamina and energy?
Man, I don't know. I question it sometimes. And you just understand you have ebbs and flows. Like, there are going to be months where you're severely depressed and you can't figure it out. And there are going to be months where you feel like you're Rocky, just knocking out everything that comes at you. And I think the uniform things are just really focused on planning. Plan. The military rule of 1/3, 2/3. If you've got a mission coming up, use 1/3 of your time planning, 2/3 of your time executing, getting ready to go. And a lot of people, especially when they're entrepreneurs, are just overreacting to everything. Every opportunity that comes through the door, they pursue. Every sales guy that calls them, they take a call. Every meeting, they take a meeting, versus, what are your goals? What are the actions that get you towards your goals? How are you planning against those actions? Like, are they in your calendar? Are you accountable to them? Do you have the budget to make them work? And then, if you look at my journal, I have a very prescriptive process, and I have my daily game changers, and you can only really affect the next 90 days of your life. So it's really cool that you have to use spreadsheets for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, but all you can really affect is the next 90 days. Realistically, if your product lead time is longer, you might be able to force it out a little bit further, but all you can really affect is your next 90 days. So what's most important for you in your next 90 days to get towards your goals? And those are your game changers. And there's usually like 2 main topics that you have as your game changers and all these subtasks that go underneath them. And then every day when you get up, pick a subtask and say, I'm going to work 2 hours today on this subtask. I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. I'm not going to let anything get in my way. And I'm going to do that, because your to-do list never ends. Like it never ends until the day you die. After you have this business or other businesses, you're always going to have to pick up your kids from soccer, go grocery shopping, pay your bills, whatever. You're going to have all of these tasks that are going on, right? But those are tasks that they take away from you hitting your goals versus you hitting your goals. And so by focusing on these game changers daily, if you spend 2 hours a day on your game changers, at the end of a work week, that's 10 hours. At the end of a month, that's 40 hours. At the end of a year, that's a full quarter that you spent working on the things that are most important to you and your company. Dedicated, focused time. And when you get good at it and you see the positivity that comes from focusing on those goals and that time management, that scheduling, it just becomes addictive. And not only is it proving to you that you can do it, but it's proving to the people around you that if they attack their goals, they can make them happen. And in a small business, in an entrepreneurship business, like really looking at your people, like what's your mantra? My mantra right now is back in black. Like, we've struggled a little bit financially over the last year. Personally, I've struggled a little bit over the last year, but like over the last 3 months, I've just had some pivotal changes. Like now we're back in black. Like we're going to be lean, we're going to be mean, we're going to be profitable, and we're going to drive forward with authority. Like we've got it now. Our customer service manager, she's funny. She's like, my mantra is release the Kraken. And I'm like, I like that. She's just going to be tenacious, and she's one of those people who over time we've built her up, and she was a elementary school secretary for 17 years, kept getting passed over for promotions, and we finally stole her away. And we've taken that kind, loving attitude, to really grow our customer service department, but at the same time too, really try to drive her to be a business leader, where she's now making good, solid business decisions, and she's making them with authority, which, now she's really taken that position of authority now and not letting stuff get in her way. And hers is release the Kraken. And it's good to have those themes. It's good to have those mantras and know what you're aiming toward.
I love it. There's so much I love about what you just said, and I don't want to burn our time diving through that, but I know that, I really appreciate your candor on all that too. And for listeners, I hope that you can take away from this that next 90 days and the game changers that applies to every single career path. It's not just entrepreneurship, of having that discipline, prioritization, keeping your eye on the prize. And I think that any career has the opportunity to get stuck in the minutia that doesn't matter. Where did the experience with Shark Tank come about, and where was the company at that point?
I got the call in April 2015. We just had a big media hit with Gizmodo. We had taken on a small bit of investment from a local VC firm, another veteran-owned company, TA Group Holdings, ran by another fellow Ranger, and like he understood what we were doing. Everybody else told us, no, we're crazy. We're not giving you our money to make flip-flops in war zones. But they saw what we were doing, believed in us, and gave us a small amount of money. So we were using that to grow our business, had a big media hit. We're growing sales, but we still weren't profitable. Like we were still figuring things out. And then Shark Tank called us in April, which is our prime selling season in the spring, and we realized the size of the opportunity. So we dropped everything we were doing from a sales and marketing standpoint and focused solely on Shark Tank. This was like a big special operations hit. For the equivalent us, this was like going to get bin Laden, right? We had to go hit it hard, and 2 months training, filmed in June, came back at the end of the filming. We knew we had gotten it, but then there was like 7 months in between your filming and your air date. And in the meantime, we had missed all of our spring sales. We were struggling on inventory, struggling on cash. And we were driving through that summer, and I still remember it was November, November 2015. And like we were having discussions about shutting down the business. I was looking at months and months and months of loss on the profit and loss statement, like months and months and months of it. It was getting better, but it was still losses. And like I was incurring all of those losses personally. And then we looked at our business model, trying to go after dealers and retailers and have their margins, and then go, screw it, let's just go direct online and consumer only. We changed our pricing. Our volume tripled overnight. We sold through everything throughout the holiday season of December 2015. And we still hadn't got the call from Shark Tank, right? We thought we were going to air on Veterans Day. And so we stocked up on a whole bunch of inventory for Veterans Day, and then it didn't air. And so we were stuck with paying bills, no cash, tons of inventory, no marketing behind it. And it was a big struggle, and we were getting ready to shut down. So we We changed our pricing, sold through all of our inventory, and then as soon as like all of our inventory was gone, we got the call from Shark Tank saying, "Hey, you guys are going to air in 2 weeks." And so what do? You're going to have your biggest sales event ever, and all of the inventory we had would have sat on my dining room table. And so we went into problem solving mode again. I called a couple of friends. Like I said, "Hey man, I need to borrow 50 grand right now. Like this is what's happening." And if you have the reputation, if people see how hard you work, they're going to take 5-6 figure bets on you. And 48 hours later, I had the cash in the bank account, and we got things into production, and we started rolling. And we did more business in 36 hours than we did in our entire company history after the Shark Tank. Yeah, it was crazy.
That's so wild. I love. I think that your story is so representative of the entrepreneurial path of just the craziness and never sure thing, and wondering if the lights are going to go out any second. And that's pretty incredible. That article in Gizmodo that kind of started all of this, was that something you guys sought out, or did they just catch wind of what was going, or how? Because that seems like kind of the inciting incident for this entire thing.
It was. So we had we have a story, right? And that's what people really are buying into when they're buying our product, is they're buying the story. Like, you can buy flip-flops anywhere. Everybody makes good flip-flops. They're usually cheaper than ours because they're made in China. But the value add is we have the story, like special operations, combat vets, making products in women-owned factories, putting little girls in school. If people want to be a part of that, like, hell yeah, right? It's cool. It's a cool story, and people need to hear about it. And it needs to be explained in different ways to different markets to get more people in. And so we hired a PR agent. Her name's Kate Ketchick, and she was out of Montana. And she, just gave us a few hours every week, and sent emails to different media people. And she introduced us to a guy named Wes Seiler, and he was for Gizmodo. He used to write for Jalopnik and Playboy, and now he works at Outside Magazine. And we were in LA, and he was in LA, and she's like, "Oh, you guys got to meet." And we met in a bar, and we had a beer in a bar. He recorded the conversation and then got on his motorcycle and left. and then 5 days later, he crushed our website. He crushed the servers. We were down for like 24 hours. A couple 100,000 people read this article in a day or two. It was amazing. So yeah, we were actually seeking it out. If you want to get noticed, you got to be in front of eyeballs. You got to be on people's phones. You got to be in the media, where people are going to see and read what you're doing.
Do you? I love your statement earlier about the library card over higher education, and I'm just curious. Do you have any resources that help you that you would recommend to listeners? That could be podcasts, books, conferences, whatever, but something that just kind of helps you stay fresh or current, or build skill sets relevant to your career.
Yeah. So many people spend so much time reading these books and listening to the podcast and going to these conferences and not actually doing it. It's difficult for me to see, because you see the same guys at all the same different places, and then they still haven't started their business, so they're not off the ground yet. What I say is, like, just do it. I like personalmba.com. And so you can just go there, and they're going to have 99 books you can read. If you read all of those books and understand the concepts out of those books, you have an Ivy League MBA, and you did it for the price of a library card. Good. So when I found personalmba.com, because of those mandatory reading lists that I was reading when I was in the military, I read the list of books, and I was like, damn, I'd already read like 30 or 40 of them. Like, I'd already done the work. And so I was like, I was a confidence builder. Like, well, what are the things that I need to understand? Well, I need to understand business finance. So I'll go get the book on business finance and read through that. Okay, now I feel like I've got the skills. I'm just going to go do it. And then you start clicking buttons and, investing in software and figuring it out. And if you run into a problem, go back down to the library, grab the book again, flip to the page where your problem's, highlighted, find the solution, execute, assess, repeat. It's the old OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, assess, direct. I can't remember what it was, but you just got to go after it. Just got to do it. There's nothing that is going to move your business forward more than doing it. I'm not saying doing it blindly, but you don't have to have the perfect information. You don't need to be a Rhodes Scholar. You don't need to have a Harvard MBA or whatever in order to be a successful business owner. There's one college degree in our company. That's me. And everybody else is smarter than I am. They're more effective than I am. And, they're able to do it just by finding the resources that are out there, either in a library or on the internet.
I love it. I'm curious, I know we're short on time, so one quick question is, you gave a TEDx talk, and I'll put that in the show notes for listeners. It's definitely worth a watch. How did that come about, and what was that experience like?
So right after I tell you not to go to all these conferences and all these other things, I got invited down by a friend of mine ran the veterans program at Nike, and we're just a couple hours north of them, and they were hosting an event to how Nike could help veterans. And they brought in all of these different nonprofits who they thought would be good. And one nonprofit that we support is the Station Foundation, ran by Kevin and Shannon Stacy. They're out of Montana, just south of Bozeman, Gallatin Gateway. But they focus on transitioning special operations veterans and families to the civilian market. And so Kevin couldn't make it. Shannon was there. I said I'd go down with her and just sit with her. And I sat next to a guy named Brian Nelson, who is a former, Army officer who was just getting out, and he was running communications, and he got involved in the TEDx Tacoma talk, and we're going around the table, and I just said, hey, I'm Griffin, we're combat flip-flops, I make stuff in war zones and put little girls to school. And then after he does his speech, he turns and looks at me, he goes, hey man, that's a really great story. Would you mind giving a TEDx talk? And I was like, yeah, dude, let's do it. And it's really that fast. So yeah, that's how it happened.
I want to use this opportunity to plug for listeners. You heard Griff just kind of rattle off his one sentence explanation of what his company does. And I think that is so valuable for every single person who's transitioning to have just a quick sentence. And you can see right there how a very succinct, precise way of explaining what he's all about led to a game-changing opportunity. And it's just really good to be able to practice that and have it just down cold, where you can rattle off whether it's your company or your personal intentions, what you're looking for, because people want to help you. I had two last questions, and I know we got to wrap up. One is, where is the company at right now? Whatever you're able to share, maybe headcount or amount of funding raised, and more importantly, how can listeners help you? How can they support you?
So where we're at right now is, I think we've finally taken all the beatings that we've needed to. We figured out where our correct channels are to really drive the mission forward. And that's just direct to consumer online and through Amazon. So we've partnered with both those in a very major way over the last year. We just took on funding. And so a big thing for us is we have sold out of every piece of product we've ever made. So people often buy product and they pre-order it and they have to wait for months in order to get it. And that's just not a good way to have business, because then you have to discount to get people to pre-sale, and people only buy one pair of flip-flops a year, and if you miss the spring season, they go buy another brand. And so we finally brought on some funding where we have that margin, where we can have inventory on the deck in order to satisfy, the people's need to buy flip-flops and have them shipped immediately. Yeah, that's where we're at. And then we just dropped a book. And if you guys want to read about how much this adventure sucked and the challenges that we went through, buy the book. It's number one in our category on Amazon. Mark Cuban endorsed it. We got a couple other endorsements coming out. It's selling well. My favorite review of the book so far has been, this book grabs you by the neck and doesn't let you go until you read every last word. And my hope for the book, when we first started writing this with Leo Jenkins, and he's a Ranger self-published author, best-selling self-published author, award-winning filmmaker. Now he's an artist painter. I told him when we first started this book, is when I want the reader to pick up this book, I want them to feel like at the end of the book, they're like Luke Skywalker in an X-Wing about to huck a rocket into the Death Star. Every person out there that's listening to this thing has the ability to pick up, drive forward, focus, and go tackle something big. And our story is just an example of how you can do it. I mean, if we started a multi-million-dollar flip-flop company in Afghanistan, and that's spread out into multiple countries all over the world, and we did it with no money, no investment, and just a handful of people with no college degrees, you can do whatever you want.
I love it.
Anytime, anywhere. Yeah. And so pick up the book, buy the book, find it on Amazon, and please, please, please leave a review. That would be super helpful. And then, that's it. Just follow us on Instagram at Combat Flip Flops. If you want to interact with me personally, I'm on Instagram at CFFGriff.
And for listeners, I'll have a link to all of this in the show notes. The book is called Rise of the Unarmed Forces. And final question I always ask, Griff, is what have we not covered that you want to make sure you leave listeners with before you wrap up?
Just gratitude. Like, I started journaling, every day. It would have been January 1st, 2017. And it significantly changed my life. And I think the thing that you need to be focused on as an entrepreneur is the good things that happen in your life, and getting up every day and expressing gratitude for at least 3 things, and then leave a spot in your journal for good things that happened today. So that way, when you're facing a tough time or things are struggling, you can flip back through your journal and go, no, like, I watched my daughter get a win in a wrestling match. No, that call came in from this sales agent. All these things came in, and you go, no, good things are happening, because it's so easy to get into the pain cave as an entrepreneur to think the world's ending. It's good to have those personal reminders about how good your life actually is, and how you're helping others.
Awesome, Griff. This has been one of my favorite conversations out of 230 of these to date. I appreciate your sharing your story, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you, Justin.
Surface.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Uniform. There are over 200 free episodes at beyondtheuniform.io. They're classified by the industry of focus, the functional role the person plays, and more. Beyond the Uniform is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Justin Asiri. Our Director of Outreach, responsible for sponsorship and guest episodes, is Steve Bain. Our editor, responsible for the show notes and text transcripts for all episodes, is Kathleen Dillon. Our data analytics and insights advisor is Andrew Woolridge. If you are enjoying Beyond the Uniform, you can help us out by telling your veterans and friends in the military about this free resource. There is more information on the website about how you can sponsor an episode or donate to our program to help us grow the work that we're doing. Be sure to check out the coaching section of beyondtheuniform.io, where you can be paired with professional, subsidized coaches to help you figure out your next career move. You can sign up for our newsletter to be up to date on the latest happenings at Beyond the Uniform. And in each show notes section, there is a link to audible.com, which is providing a free audiobook of your choice to Beyond the Uniform listeners. You get a free book of your choosing, and Beyond the Uniform gets $15 to subsidize the cost of the show, regardless of whether you continue with audible.com or not. Check that out and more in the show notes for this episode. Keep the feedback coming. Let me know what resources would help you in your career, and we'll do our best to make that happen. Take care, be safe, and I'll be back next week with more interviews with military veterans about their civilian career.